Welcome to Fly on the Wall podcast. I'm your host, Chris Sonksen, CEO and founder of Church Boom. Here you get to sit in on a live coaching session as I coach pastors through the ministry challenges we all face. If you find this podcast helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Hey everyone, welcome to today's podcast. We're talking with my good friend Kevin Foster on how to know when it's time to build. If you don't make that right decision and you do it wrong, man, it can cost you so much. You don't want to build something too big that it ends up costing you so much you have no finances for additional programs, but you don't want to build it so small that you run out of space in a year. How do you know how to do that and how to navigate that? We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Before we do, I want to encourage you to check out churchboom.org. You'll find the Church Boom University we launched several months ago. It is absolutely amazing. You have monthly times where we get on the phone together with different leaders, including myself, where we learn and grow together. It's a place where you can talk with other leaders. It's a website that's designed just for you. You've got master classes. You can go on there and watch with your team on how to create leaders in the church, how to create generosity in the church, all those things. And then there's physical resources, books that are sent to you. It's an incredible program. It's only $29 a month. It is so cheap. I encourage you to check it out. Go to churchboom.org and go and check out the Church Boom University. With that said, let's jump into today's conversation. How can I serve you today? What's going on?
Yeah, so we're really in a great season right now, I think, at LifeBridge, and I think one of the challenges that we have, I think maybe a lot of churches have, and something that we're really trying to hone in on right now in particular, because there's always so many things you can work on in the local church, right? And so I think for us, we're really like at this moment where we're really trying to establish a good leadership pipeline right now. And so what have you seen, Chris, are some of the best models of leadership pipelines that you have observed in your work with many different local churches?
Well, we've talked about the leadership ladder. It's talked about a lot on Church Boom University. People can watch the master classes on it, and really, really helpful. But, I've always talked about leadership circles. I think those are I always come back to those because I view those as a farm league, and I view leadership apprenticing as the pros, the big leagues. The one, I don't know if I would choose one over the other, but because I do think one is, you got 5 or 6 people, you're meeting with them, you're going through a book together, you meet with them, go through a couple books together. Those that you think have potential, stay in the circle. Those that are like, it's time to move them out of the circle, put new people in. But the key is taking one of those people out of the circle and moving them up into apprenticing, which is where I think a lot of churches miss it. I was talking with one of our executive guys that does executive coaching. He was telling me about a church in the Midwest where they've grown from 500, 800. It's been awesome. Now they're going to launch the next campus. He kept telling them, you got to get ready by developing leaders. You got to apprentice people. You got to get 2 people under you that are just as good as you. And worship did it. The youth did it. The small groups, the first impressions. The children's director kept dragging their feet. Well, now some building opened up for them or whatever in their denomination. They got an opportunity 15 miles down the road. And he's like, we're not even at all ready in our children's department. And it goes back to, this person didn't focus on what was really important. Now, fast forward a year later, this children's department is, in a way, holding back the church because they're not even sure what they're going to do. They're literally thinking, maybe it's just not the right time for us, and it's one department. So I say all that to say, I love the leadership ladder, church, volunteers, leaders, leadership circles, leadership apprenticing. But those last 2 is where, in my opinion, where most churches don't go. They go volunteers, or church, volunteers, leaders, but they don't do circles and they don't do apprenticing. Now, some guys are like, well, we don't want to do circles. I honestly don't care. What I do care more about, Kevin, is that's just a system we created. But what I do care about is, what are you doing intentionally to raise up leaders? Because I say it all the time, intuition is never duplicatable. It's never duplicatable. So you have to figure out a system to raise people up. And you got to ask the question. I think it should be brought up in step. Okay, who are the 2 people you're apprenticing? I think the worship person should say this one and this one. We want them in the next 6 to 9 months to be as good as you, if not better. And I think in theory we agree with that. I think it's biblical. I think secular people have caught on to it. You can't even be a plumber in the union until you are an apprentice. You can't even be a plumber. But we'll throw people into ministry without training them. And I think it's when we don't raise up people to go to that next level. I think that's many times what holds us back from growing, from multiplying, because we're not raising up the next level generation of leaders, not so much generation, but the next level. So that's what I choose. That's what I do. That's what I teach. But it doesn't, if someone has something else they want to do, that's fine. Just find something that raises up leaders and gets people to a point where they're ready to run that ministry with or without you. And that's what you want to get to. And I think in theory, we all agree with it, but we don't actually do it.
So what happens if you have a staff member that you mentioned this kids pastor
Yeah.
at a church in the Midwest
Yeah.
that didn't kind of grab a hold of that vision. So how can you work with that staff pastor who maybe to change kind of their entire belief system on what they're there to do? Like, what are some effective ways to be able to help that staff member move forward with this type of a vision?
Yeah. Well, I think some people, I think you always have to know that when you start doing that, you're changing expectations in the middle of the game. And you got to know that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it's fine to do that. But there is an expectation change. Now, what do you do with that? I think it comes down to one of two things, Kevin. Is the person just doesn't know how to do it? Okay, that's problem one. Or is it a different problem where the person knows how to, maybe they could probably do it, they're just resistant to it. Like, I don't want to do it that way. I don't want to spend the time doing that. Are they resistant because they're fearful of being outshined? Are they resistant because they're insecure? Are they resistant because they're lazy? Are they resistant because they've never done it and they don't want to do it and they just do it on their own? Like, what's the point of resistance? So it could be, I just don't know how to do it. And I think you can fix that. Like, okay, let me walk you exactly how to do this. If it's a resistance issue, find out what the resistance is. Why are you resisting this thing? Let's get down to it. And I think it has to be an honest conversation. Like, why you're resisting it. Well, I'm not resistant. Okay, well, you're not doing it. And I do think there has to be a paradigm shift in our minds as, lead pastors, leaders of the organization. And this is a strong statement, but it's something I like to use is, well, to be on this team at LifeBridge, your church, that's just the price of admission. If you're not developing leaders and apprenticing people, you're not going to last here,
Right.
because this is what we do. So I do think you have to find what the root cause is. Why are you resisting it? And figure that out, and then help them to either figure that out. But then at some point, the honest conversation has to come in. Like, look, I've worked with you. I've talked with you. I've showed you how to do it. We've addressed the insecure issue. You're still not doing it. Now let me get very clear with you. This is what we do, and if you don't do it, this is going to cause a problem for the future. I think you have to do that at some point, because you can't just. You've heard me say this before. The worst thing you can do for your strong leaders is to tolerate a weak one. So you don't want to. Well, he demands it from everybody else, but this one gets an exception. Well, that makes you look bad, and
Right.
So you want to be really, really careful with that. So.
Yeah, no, that's really great because I think the answer to that question for us is really important for this next question I'm going to ask you, which is we are preparing. We've kind of outgrown our space. We've been 7 years in this building that we've been leasing. It's been a great building for us, but it's coming to the end, and we're actually running out of space now. And so we're looking at the next step for our church is to get into a new building, a larger building, which is a great problem to have. But what's the best advice that you can give me to kind of prepare the congregation to go into a building campaign?
Well, going into a building campaign, that's a big deal. Obviously, I don't know if there's, you're a great leader, so maybe some of this stuff is just more of a reminder. One is making sure that you're moving through the scales of leadership. So, hey, the staff knows and they're good with it. The board knows, they're good with it. Now I'm going to meet with all our key leaders, they're good with it. Now I'm going to meet with the volunteers, they're good with it. When you start checklisting, checking that off, all those 4 levels, by the time you get to the congregation, it's a done deal. Meeting before the meeting is the most important meeting. So once you have those meetings, that's probably the biggest thing. It's not so much preparing the congregation as much as making sure your leaders and volunteers and staff and board are ready to go. If they're not ready to go, you're going to have a really difficult time with the overall congregation. So the advice I give everybody all the time when they're about to do something major is make sure that as you go through the scales of communication that you're hitting green lights all the way up. If you're hitting nothing but red lights and you're like, forget it, I'm going to go to the congregation, like, good luck, because that's going to be difficult. So I think that's one of the biggest things is just making sure that as you move through the scales of communication that you're getting green lights.
Yeah, I think it seems like most of the leadership and really the congregation's been on board with this because we've been talking about this now for the last couple of years. I think it's more so like, how do I can prepare the congregation to begin to give sacrificially? I think that's the thing. I think most people will be like, yeah, we're all in, man, we're excited about this, but then when it comes down to opening up their wallet a little bit more,
Right.
it might be a little bit of a different issue. And so, are there any good like series or is this where we have to like hire an outside consultant to come in and help us to raise money? Or I mean, what's kind of the best path forward to kind of prepare the people to give sacrificially to
Yeah.
this?
Well, I'm a big fan of who before how. So you got to get the right who's on board. And that concept is, I do think that whether you hire someone, at least get a couple hours with someone on a Zoom call or in person and just say, man, what are some things we need to consider? Someone that lives in this space literally can say, if you want to raise this, your congregation needs this size. Someone that can give you some extremely clear parameters, I think is really important. So yeah, I do think getting some help is really important. I do think back to the scales of communication, I think you could almost use the same format, Kevin, of you want your leaders to create lead gifts. And
Okay.
you're going to hear that if you get a consultant, they're going to talk to you about lead gifts. They may call it a different name, but it's okay. I'm going to meet with the staff. Let's talk about lead gifts there. I'm going to meet with key leaders in our church. Let's talk about lead gifts there. It's back to, hey, we're trying to raise, $2 million. And I've met with our leaders and I met with our staff and our board, and we've already raised 1.1 million. Because now you've laid the tone of generosity, because in a congregation, you're doing it more as a big group, not really Q&A going on there. But when you're in a bigger church, I always tell them do it in pockets of small of groups of leaders. If you've got a massive church and you're like, we got 500 leaders. I'm like, don't do it in front of 500 leaders. That's a congregation. Do it in
Right.
groups of 50, 75, so that they can ask Q&A and it can be more transparent. You can sit on a stool, have a conversation. You got to get your staff, your board, your key leaders. You got to give them to give key gifts or make commitments. I call them lead gifts. A lot of people call them lead gifts, something else. That, I think, fosters generosity. I think it was in the book of Acts where it said the leaders led first in the giving. It talked about the generosity and the giving, but it makes a point. I think it's in, chapter 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there. It talks about the leaders led. And I think that's such an important part, that they lead the way in it. And I think that's part of that scale of communication. You could do it for scale of giving. Let them lead. And if they set the tone of generosity, the church will usually follow. And,
Yeah.
I remember one of the big campaigns we had to do. I think we were trying to raise, I don't even remember. I'm going to say, I don't even know. We're going to raise 2 million or 3 million or something. I don't know, for something years and years ago. And we did a whole, board leader. By the time we even got to the church, I think it was 1.1 we were at,
Wow.
with 1 million to go. And I'm like, we're halfway there. And it was church at the time, whatever size it was, call it 1,500. It was only 100 people. 100 people already did 1.1 million. And so I said,
Wow.
folks, we've had 100 people already do 1.1 million. There's 1,400 less of us, this was years ago, to do an additional 900,000.
Hmm.
And we hit it. It
Hmm.
was easy. It wasn't easy, but I mean, it felt easier because the generosity was set by the leaders. And the church
Hmm.
goes the ways of the
Yeah.
leaders. They always do.
That's great. Obviously, you've been involved in a few of these in the past. And so, and you probably, before you made that next move, you probably had a few different options of where you could go. Like, what were some of the signposts that caused you to go in the particular direction you ended up going versus another maybe building or property that was a good option but wasn't ultimately what you felt like the Lord wanted you to go? What were some of those signposts to point you in a particular option or direction toward a certain property or certain building?
Yeah, yeah. I do remember one time when we were buying some property. Um, I think we probably looked at 6 or 7 before we felt like it was the right thing. I think I think
Hmm.
there's common logic from counsel, wisdom. I think there's
Okay.
the Lord. Obviously, there's the Lord, and then there's common logic from
Right.
wisdom of counsel. And that was one thing. Secondly, I didn't want to. I wanted to make sure that we weren't biting off more than we could chew. The old saying, you shape the
Mm-hmm.
building, then the building shapes you. And that happens so much where it's like, man, we bit off so much. We got no money left over for program, no money left for staff. We're just trying to make the payment. You do not want to end up in that boat. So you do need, there's some mathematical equation, I think, that needs to be followed to figure out this is how much we could afford. So I think you have to kind of
Hmm.
figure that out. Um, so wisdom, as we looked at the different pieces, mathematical, does this thing work? I mean, there's faith, but then there's okay, but you're biting off a lot, man. You might want to be careful with this. Um, the other part was making sure, for me at least, making sure that there was tons of room to grow. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
do we have the option to grow here? Can we grow? Can we expand? Well, is this? I think sometimes people build to where they're at, not build to where they're going.
Hmm.
It's not like, oh my gosh, well, we need a 10,000 seat auditorium with 4 million square feet of children's space. Like, well, no, but you don't want to build it to be like, well, we have 5 staff members, so we need 5 offices. No, I think you need to be thinking more to the future, and I think that I wouldn't say we did it all. I haven't done it right every time, but often I feel like we've done it right. Where it's like, man, we got a lot of room we
Hmm.
could grow here. We've got
That's great.
several years of growth here. Um, so I think it's those kind of things. But for a guy like you, very entrepreneurial, very aggressive, I think you have a lot of faith. You got to find that balance because I've also seen, and this is going to sound bad, and some people on the podcast aren't going to like it, but I've seen this person go from it's just faith. I'm like, no, I think it's actually unwise, And
Yeah.
I've seen it where I have seen it more than once where people get into a situation 2 years later. It's like, dude, we've got no room to breathe. All we're doing is making this payment. Like, I don't
Right.
know, man. I think you gotta find that balance. You gotta follow wisdom. That's why I think,
Mhm.
you know, man, having some. What I like about like Generis or Maxwell's group or whatever. My buddy is Generis, Dan McConnell. He kind of helps with
Mhm.
Generis, and he's one of those guys that go out and helps churches. Um, I like that they have. I like that they have equations. The
Mm.
mathematical equations. Like, well, you need this much per square foot for every child. If you have this many people and your budget's this much, mathematically, this is what your campaign's probably going to look like.
That's good.
You do 800 churches, you kind of find some formulas like, well, let me tell you, most of the time, here's what it's going to look like. And I think that's just good wisdom.
That's great. That's really
Yeah.
great. Well, I really appreciate that. One last
Yeah.
question. What are you reading right now and what's challenging you?
Oh, man. Everything's challenging me. I don't know if you have read the book, Who Not How.
Ah,
That is a phenomenal book, Who Not How. Um, that book is a book that I'm enjoying, but it's more than just enjoying it, it's the way it's challenging me.
mhm.
The concept in theory is if your how isn't that big, then you don't really need to worry about who. It's like, I want to start a youth group and grow it to 10 kids. You don't need any advice. You don't need any help. You don't need any leadership. I liken it to, 1960, whatever it was, when JFK goes, we're going to go to the moon, and I read some reports on it. And some of NASA was like, no one's told us, and so he shoots out some big vision. I can imagine he calls the leader of NASA is going, yeah, no one's ever been there. So if he just said, we want to send a rocket up in space, or just shoot a rocket up, 10,000 feet. Okay, well, I guess we could do that. He probably didn't need a lot of advice. But when you're like, we got to go on the moon, it's like, okay, well, we're going to have to find the best mathematician, the best scientists, the best engineers, you got to put some serious people in the room to figure out, how do we actually get to the moon? I think if a leader or a church, this is where I'm being challenged, if you have moon-like dreams, then you can't just go straight to how, because you don't know how to do it. You got to get the right who around you. And I'm seeing that. I've been really challenged with that in the last few months and really feel like that's a challenge in my life. Right now, in certain parts of my world, I've got a few different worlds going on. I feel like, man, we've got some insane who's around me. Where I'm like, these guys are way next level. I was with the Church Boom, some of the team members, some of our guys that work with us, and kind of in a different role. And I'm like, this guy's a player. This guy's just seriously good. But I look at other areas where I'm like, I don't have the right who around me, and no wonder we're struggling. So the answer is, that's a book that's challenging me, and the answer is how it's challenging me. One other way I feel like I'm being challenged, it isn't so much from my books or books that I've read, but it's more of in my own coaches. I have a couple coaches, and I get coaching all the time. I'm really being challenged to think differently. Matter of fact, I'm putting together a leadership talk about it that I'll be doing in a few weeks in Ohio, where I'm talking, because it's such an interesting thought process of when you meet a great leader, say a pastor that's killing it, our first intuition is, let's ask him what he does. But we really are never asking him, how do you think? I think that's a challenge. And so I feel like I'm being challenged in do I have the right people around me, and how do I fight to get the right people around me? One line I read, I think it was in the book, it says, leaders are obsessed with getting the right people around me. I like that word, obsessed. I thought, wow, like, it's not just like leaders try to get the right, leaders are really, they work hard. Leaders are obsessed to get big people around them because their dreams are so big, they know they can't do it alone. So I would say the who, and I would say the thinking. Those are the areas that are really challenging me a lot.
That's great. Well, man, thank you so much. This was amazing. There's so much stuff here I need to unpack and pray and think about later.
Absolutely.
I really
Well, thanks for being on, dude. I really do appreciate it, man.
All right.
We'll talk to you soon. Okay. Wow, what an incredible conversation with Kevin Foster, and what a great leader, and what great topics we talked about, things we all need to keep in mind. I want to remind you again to go to churchboom.org, check out Church Boom University, sign up for it. I think you'll find it absolutely helpful for you and your ministry, and we'll see you next time on Fly on the Wall.